So I would invite Margherita Spagnolo-Lob for her speech. The title is Researching in Gestalt Therapy, a way of developing our model. Thank you, Margherita.
Thank you, Gianni. So thank you, Gianni. Thank you, Jan. And all the committee, Yelena. It's nice to see many friends from here that just arrived, so we will say hello later. I think this is, I agree with Gianni, this is an important moment. I think an historical switch for Gestalt therapy, because research has not been particularly interesting aspect until a few decades ago for us as humanistic psychotherapist. And I think that this moment is important because, as Gianni said, we are realizing that if we do not go into research, we are going to die. So I remember some similar risk when I was president of the EAGT in 1998, a long time ago, and I organized the conference in Palermo, and many of you were there. And the title was Gestalt Therapy, Hermeneutics and Clinical. And this word, hermeneutics, was very strange for a lot of people. A lot of people asked me, what does hermeneutic means? At that time, when I came into the EAGT, and the first years, it was 1996, there were a lot of little centers, training centers, doing many things, doing Gestalt therapy and transactional analysis, Gestalt therapy and body work, Gestalt therapy and something else. Because the epistemology was not clear. Gestalt therapy has always been very attractive, but the hermeneutical principle and the epistemological principles were not so shared and so clear to all of us. So what I did was to have an ecumenical spirit, get all together and see, here we are, we all call ourselves Gestalt therapists. Let's see what we are. Let's see what we believe into. I think that was a turning point, because without that, without the roots, without our roots, we were going to die. And since then, and I thank the presidents that came after, like Ken Evans and Peter, and now Gianni, did a wonderful job, a wonderful work to continue this work of root the practice of Gestalt therapy into our principles. And now we know who we are now, and we are looking for an evidence of what we are and what creates change in what we do. I prepared some slides for you, and just an overall subject, because being the first presenter after Gianni, I tried to do something very general. And I would like to ask for an experiment afterwards, because we cannot live without experiments, right? And it's a very nice thing for us to practice, to put into practice what we say. So I will try to tell you what I prepare, and then I hope we can make an experiment. Well, doesn't move. That's funny. I moved here, but the thing doesn't move. From Bermuda, we save ourselves.
Click your arrow.
Yeah, but it doesn't move.
Oh.
Maybe there is some, the woman that... Metti la chiavetta. Here, yeah, no.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I just had to shake it a little bit. So, while decades ago psychotherapy research was considered a difficult and even contradictory field, in these last years research projects are growing in all over psychotherapy methods. Most important, there is a shared enthusiasm among psychotherapists for all methods for research. And it seems that psychotherapists believe that research is in line with their passion for human relationships, rather than a contradictory way of looking at the same object of study, which is human relationships. So it seems that research today can give psychotherapists a recognition of the importance of their work, against the threatening tendency to reduce treatment to mere medical or behavioral change. You know, we are how strong behavior therapists are, and cognitive and behavioral therapists. It's true that they write a lot of articles in scientific journals of their power because they are in the universities and they demonstrate that they work. But at the same time, there is a strong threatening tendency to reduce suffering and the treatment for suffering to mere medical treatment or behavioral treatment. And we don't want that. So differently from the time when humanistic approaches were founded, today research is seen not as an opposing not as opposing the complexity and spontaneity of our work, but rather as a possible ally in the recognition of its importance. The development of phenomenological research has helped even Gestalt therapists to address research, and we will see that in the grounded theory that Jan will present to us. So the development of phenomenological research is a very important step for us, because we can research starting from the experience of the person, both the therapist and the client. As Gianni said, there are two different traditional methods of research in psychotherapy. One is the outcome research, which measures the results after psychotherapy. For instance, the differences between before and after psychotherapy with standardized instruments. Process research studies various aspects of the psychotherapy process, which can be measured even while treatment is ongoing, independently from the results. Outcome research, an example of it is the clinical outcomes in routine evaluation outcome measure, the core OM, that it will be presented by Christine Stevens, I think. And we have to thank all of us, Christine, because she did a wonderful job in applying this very simple outcome measure to demonstrate that Gestalt therapy works with, I don't remember how many clients you tried it, but it's a very, very important work for us. Thank you. And the core OM has been applied to Gestalt psychotherapists by Christine Stevens, and the Italian Federation of Association of Psychotherapy, all the method that is chaired by Gianni as well, recommends that it be applied to all methods in Italy. And it's also applied by Gestalt psychotherapists of the Italian Association for Gestalt Therapy. So there are people in this, except Gianni that is supporting this, there are people in this room that are here because they work with the core OM and to apply them in the clinical centers and other centers where Gestalt therapy is used. Now, process research. An example of process research is measurement of the therapeutic alliance, for instance. There is Colli and Lingiardi who produced a research about to measure the alliance between therapist and client. And then they compare this measure with other variables of the same process, like sex or age of client and therapist, and how much time is taken by words by one or the other, number of sessions, for instance, length of treatment, type and seriousness of diagnosis, etc. Another example of the process research is by Fivas de Persinge, the Swiss researcher who invented the research situation called Lausanne Trilogue play. She is the first who included the father into the infant research that was before was only between mother and child, and she included the father. And she did a process research because she created a research situation where with some observation tools where we can see, we can measure different variables of the process of the interaction. And another example of process research is the one that Stern did with his group, the Boston Process Change Study Group. They got together and they asked themselves, what does really create the change in psychotherapy? They all are psychoanalysts. And they realized certain things that determine the process of psychotherapy. And from there, the theory on the moments of meeting came out, which is very close to Gestalt therapy understanding. There is a problem about the research in psychotherapy, which has been called the problem about placebo. How do you say placebo? Placebo, and the Dodo verdict. It has been found that from 10 to 18% of clients register a meaningful improvement when they are just put on a waiting list for psychotherapy. So we are just welcomed. You will go on to psychotherapy in 3 months, they get better. So the question is, how do we define what makes people better? In medicine, there is placebo, but in placebo is nothing. Is a medicine that is not a medicine. Is nothing. But in psychotherapy, we cannot have nothing because there are always dimensions and variables that belong to the experience of the person. So it's impossible to define a placebo in the realm of human relation. So what they make them change? The Dodo verdict is about allies in the Wonderland story, no? Dodo is say that everybody wins. Everybody deserves an award, deserves to be awarded. So outcome research is not enough because we know that everybody wins. But what happens? We need to address process the research. So the Dodo verdict pushed the researcher to understand, to go into process research. So from outcome to process research, outcome research has been in fashion in the first phase, as Gianni said, in the first phase, maybe to answer to Eysenck's provocation in 1952, that the psychotherapy works for spontaneous remission, spontaneous recovery. And in a second phase, it has been replaced, the outcome research, by an interest in process research, and recently in microprocess research, considered as more useful to understand what really happens in psychotherapy. So in a first moment, the question was, does psychotherapy work? In a second phase, the question has been how and for whom it works. And now the best thing is to put together process and outcome research. What is that makes change possible? This question, I remember we put this question to ourselves among 8 Gestalt therapy trainers called by Jean-Marie Robin in 2001, around 2000, when he organized the GTIN, Gestalt Therapy International Network. We gathered together, it was Gary Onteff, Michael Miller, and others. We gathered together with this question. and we had students in our program, and we tried to work together. We had never worked together. We tried to work in diets. So we put to ourselves this question: what makes change possible? But we didn't go further. And instead, other approaches did go further. So one of the best results of this question is about is by Bergin and Garfield, Handbook of Psychotherapy and Behavior Change. This is in 1990, and it's considered a sort of Bible of research on psychotherapy. So the study of the relationship between process and outcome, what has to happen it brings the question, what has to happen in the course of psychotherapy that makes it reasonable to expect a positive result? What has to happen that makes it reasonable to expect a positive result? An example of this is the interview created by Rolf Sandel that you will meet on Sunday. Very nice that he will be here. And he created the CHAP, Change After Psychotherapy. It's an interview that the therapist or someone else does to the ex-client. Very interesting. And he reads it in psychodynamic terms. And we are trying to read it in Gestalt therapy terms. I spoke with Sandel, and I mean we will be in touch with him even in these days. And Floriana will present the adjustment to the CHAP that we are studying about. We are trying to use the same interview and reading it in Gestalt therapy terms. What is that the client remembers? What is the experience that remains after psychotherapy? How does the client describe it? So I call you to, if you want to participate to this research, you are welcome. Then to put together the outcome research and the process research brought in the development of psychotherapy research, brought to the manuals, to the birth of manuals of psychotherapy. To make so many approaches started from these 3 points to choose a selection of principles of a certain method. No? Like if we want to do a manual of Gestalt therapy, we should choose a selection of principles of our method. Then describe practical examples of each principle so that it's clear what is meant. And the third is rating scales used by therapists or by an observer to measure how the sample, for instance, tapes of a number of sessions, is representative of those considered principles. I think that the book that Gianni, Ian, and Michela edited can be close to that, because the idea that they told to us as authors was to describe principles, then to give clinical examples. So it's a manual. It's a manual. What is missing is the research part. Other examples of manuals are the one by Volpe for behavior therapy and Beck for cognitive therapy of depression. So why outcome research today? It has been said before a little bit. The outcome research is still necessary for insurance, especially for Gestalt therapy, which in many countries has been far from the procedures of accreditation. At the same time, it gives us a simple feedback on our work. It's very simple. It's not difficult to use it, and it's very, very useful for us. The core OM is a good example. Our experience in Italy, and we are applying it to the Association of Gestalt Therapy, as I said, and it's used in all our clinical centers. But of course, we need to do more. Process research is more interesting for the developing of one's approach. So it's necessary, when we use process research, we need to find a good equilibrium between being free from, and at the same time being rooted into our epistemology. It's like we need to describe our principles and why we choose to observe a certain process. But at the same time, we need to be free from free to use our creative perception, because we need to see what is usually is not seen. So to look at process requires to choose what to look at. And this is derived from the peculiar perspective of the method. And at the same time, we need to be creative enough in our perception to see what isn't seen usually. You know, like in Stern's research, when he saw that the client, what makes the client change is that particular smile of the therapist, that expression of the therapist that is not in the manuals, doesn't belong to principles, but comes from the person of the psychotherapist. I give you an example of a process research that I'm bringing forward in my institute. It's a tool for family observation. The first purpose of the research is to observe contact modes in the family considered as a phenomenological field through an observative Gestalt measure developed in line with a Gestalt therapy perspective. So we want to observe what happens in the family interaction from a Gestalt therapy point. The second point is to elaborate a family observative Gestalt measure following 3 domains: the self-functioning, so the functioning of the self, the basic contact movements, like Ruella-Frank's theory, and the experience of conflict. So we want to know how in family, in the interaction, they welcome the aggression of members to process conflicts. And at the same time, we want to see the kind of contact style they use and the movements, how they move their body in contact. Another purpose of the research is to prove the measure in a research situation. We created a research situation. That is, the family is invited to be in a room, to enter a room, and the observer, the experimenter welcomes them, and he or she says, has a bag with a big paper where to make paper with colors, and also some toys, to construct some construction toys. So the experimenter says to the family, and we have chosen an age of the children between 5 and 7. The experimenter says to the family, you will stay here for 15 minutes, and we ask you to decide where you want to draw a drawing all together, or if you want to make a shape with these toys. So they have to decide, and they have to go through a decision process, which includes the aggression, and includes a lot of contact styles. And then this, it's a little bit longer, but I don't want to make it longer here. And then the situation is filmed, and the film is then rated by raters, which are instructed in the Gestalt therapy principles. This rates gives the therapist or whoever deals with the family situation a measure of these dimensions that are important for Gestalt therapy perspective. So we know how we have an evaluation of how people interact, and especially how they welcome the aggression of the members and how they move their body and the kind of contact style they use, how they use the self-functioning. This is just at the beginning. We are starting to film the situations, and again, if any of you wants to participate in this research, is welcome. Another possibility is to use research as part of a model. Gestalt therapy can be applied to many fields, you know. We have built a model of research which deals with organizational consulting. In the process of the organizational consulting, the observer observes the groups of working people and another researcher does an interview to the manager of the organization. The interview will be presented on Sunday by Floriana Romano, and you will see better this experiment. But in this case, the research is done on a part of a model. So the interview to the manager is examined with grounded theory, but with a tool which is called Atlas T. It's a computerized tool where we can see the concept of the manager. So then we have the research on the concept of the manager on the organization, and this is put together with the observation of the working group. You will see this better, but just an example of how research can be applied to a model. So research helps us to be more rooted. That's the meaning. All three kinds of research are coherent with our approach: the outcome, the process, and the support for a clinical model research. We are in a time when it has no meaning anymore to fight against institutions, to see research as a means of power and control. More than the need to develop our autonomy, we experience the need to be rooted in environment and relationships. Research helps us to root ourselves in what we do, to monitor with humility and responsibility for our social task that what we do is appropriate and what is most efficient. Also, research gives us a solid language to dialogue with other projects. To support the ground is very important today. What we need in our liquid society is to re-own the sure ground, to feel our body and what we feel when our feet are on the ground, to stay with the experience of our senses, not to stand as a figure in front of another figure, like child against father, student against teacher, etc., but to feel that we can rely on the ground where we stand. This is taken by my recent book, The Now for Next in Psychotherapy, Gestalt Therapy Recounted in Postmodern Society. So research is a way to love. Research will never deprive Gestalt therapists of their innate creativity. Research will instead support their curiosity. Curiosity, as Michael Vincent Miller and Irving Polster might say, is the soul of therapeutic love. We all are and have to be curious in order to shine the loving light of our interest on the boring and bored client. Research is curiosity. Research is love. This is what I wanted to tell you. And now, if you want, we can make an experiment. I have time until 4. Did you like it? Yes, okay. I tell you the experiment. I was thinking whether you better the experiment, not questions, better the experiment, because I don't think that we have to say this is right or not right. We have to experience something. So it's good to have an experiment now. The experience is like this in triads. You play the traditional client, therapist, and observer situation. Client and therapist play a session for 10 minutes. The observer takes notes on the following. 1, the general feeling she or he feels while observing as part of the situation. So the observer is part of the situation. What does he feel? What's the main feeling? Looking the interaction. Second, how many times the following concept words are spoken, both by the client and the therapist? So the observer doesn't have to distinguish between how many times the words are used by one or the other, but just how many times they are spoken by the two of them. And the words are pain, sorrow, and similar. Pain, sorrow, similar. Joy, happiness, and similar. Relate, relationship. You, when one addresses to the other. So when they say you, addressing the therapist or the client. I, when they say I. When they say we, and when they say wish or desire. So these are the words that the observer has to rate, has to note. After 10 minutes, the observer says, stop, you have finished your time. And he or she tells to the other two, to the client and therapist, what he has noted and felt. Then, so both the feeling and how many times the words have been spoken. And then the client and therapist, the other two, comment on how much close or far from their experience they consider the notes and feeling of the observer. So the client and therapist tell to the observer how much far or close they feel to his notes. It's okay. I leave it. I leave the slide on, so you can remember the words. It's okay to do this? Okay. Did you take note of the words? Did you take note of the words? I will fix it, but I don't want to lose time. So the words are pain, sorrow, similar, joy, happiness, similar, relate, relationship. Slowly. Huh? Slowly. Pain, sorrow, joy, happiness, relate, relationship. Then you, I, we, and wish, desire. Okay, we have a quarter, so 10 minutes the session, and then 5 minutes to discuss. And I say goodbye, because the next when you finish, I will not be here. The next speaker will be here. Okay, thank you very much, and have a good experiment.